podcast. I'm Jack Jordan Maynard, and we have a lot to discuss in this podcast ahead of the first race in Saudi Arabia this month. With me to go through testing and all the latest news is the one and only Tobias Bloom from eForm LD. You alright, buddy?
I'm all right. How about you?
Yeah, it's been a busy couple of weeks. Formula E wise. A lot of content to go through, a lot to discuss, a few things changing. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to this episode.
Feels so good to be back on the podcast.
It's good.
And as you say, there's been a lot going on. I mean, we had testing, we had liveries being presented, we had news. Finally, some stuff to talk about.
I know, and we're now only 22 days. It feels like, I know it's like 100 days. I remember when I reset the timer on the website and you're like, 110 days from the end of New York to the start of Saudi Arabia. But we're now under a month, 22 days to go at the time of recording this. Hopefully it won't be only be a few days until it's actually out for you to listen to. But we're getting there now. We're here. Saudi Arabia is on the doorstep. So I think the perfect place to start, though, was the 3-day test that we had in Valencia. And I know, Tobias, you've told me in many podcasts before, we can't
testing
talk too
doesn't
much
mean
about
a thing.
It doesn't mean exactly. But you have to agree with me here. If there's at least one thing that we have learned, that it is mighty close.
Yeah. I mean, if we take one thing away from testing, it is close, yeah. I can only repeat, we shouldn't read too much into the lap times, because Valencia has never been very good at representing actual car performance and actual race pace and actual qualifying pace and all of that. But if you just look at the times, 22 of 24 cars were within 1 second of each other. So as I say, don't read too much into the times, but it's unbelievably close. At least in Valencia, we will have to wait and see what happens in Diriyah. But at least in Spain, the field was mighty close.
And what I also want to pick up on is obviously that, as you said, 22 drivers within 1 second, but also 5 different constructors. In the top 5, you had BMW again leading the way with Gunther. Mahindra were there, Dragon were there, and I want to talk about Dragon there with Nico Muller a bit later, and you had Antonio Felix Acosta and Mitch Evans, and they were covered by 0.2 of a second. So again, it's just showing that it could be anyone's game going into this season, and that's what I love. It could be anyone's game.
I love it as well. Yeah, I have no idea who's best going into Saudi. BMW did look strong, but they looked strong in 2018 as well, and I mean they won the first race. We're very lucky because both Diaz drivers were penalised. Then should have won in Marrakesh, but after that they were there or thereabout, but they weren't the top team that they were promising to be in Valencia. Still, this year, a new track lap record, whatever the name for that thing is. Max Gunther almost broke into the 114s in Valencia. We haven't seen that last year. So yeah, as I say, BMW did look very strong, but also Mahindra looked decent. Jaguar, Nissan, a lot could be on the table for Diriyah, and as I said, I have no idea who's going to be the favorite in air quotes heading into the season. No idea.
No, definitely you don't know. But you think Techeetah was still there, and if not to do too much of a Saudi Arabia preview like early, but they were strong last season at that track, and maybe Saudi Arabia, they got that little fast flowing section before a few little chicanes and then that long back straight. So maybe that might suit their car quite well. But I still think that they could be the team to beat this season. With Da Costa now joining as well as Vern, that lineup is scary, I think, for Techeetah. And but to be fair, like Da Costa was 4th overall in the times, 0.2 off. Vern was only P11, but as you said, like reading into that, there's probably, and he's only he's 0.4 off the time, and he's in P11, so he's still there. Like even down in P11, so you can't write Vern off or Da Costa at all.
No, not at all. We have to, of course, DS Techeetah are team champions, and John-Eric Verne is the driver's champion, and I'm sure Antonio Felix da Costa didn't switch teams just to be the second driver and be the support for Jeff. He is keen to win, and so is Jeff, and as usual, they're going to push each other, and they're there to win. They're not there for they're not playing around. They are going to be expecting to be one of the top teams again.
Yeah, and I want to talk about Virgin. Now, Virgin were, with the Frines and Bird, they were the leaders of the first couple of sessions. And just looking at the times there, they were fastest in the first day of testing and the second day of testing. But in the final, which is really interesting, like the majority of the fastest lap times were set either session 5, so that's the morning session on the Friday, or session 6, which was the afternoon session on the Friday. But interestingly, Virgin didn't go quicker on those 2 days. I don't know if that's anything to go by. Their fastest time was set for Frines, who was an 8th overall. Only, again, 8th overall, but, just under 3 tenths slower than Gunther's time. But he set his on the afternoon session on the Wednesday in the third session. And Bird's time, who was in 13th, again, just a shy of under half a second away from Gunther's time, was set in the second session. On the first day, Sam Bird set his first time. So that's a bit interesting as well, I think.
It is, but I wouldn't read too much into that again.
Yeah, I know.
Sorry to be the party pooper
here.
Yeah,
it's true, but I was just looking at it. I thought that's very interesting. Maybe Virgin went straight out from the guns and went and set their fastest times and went for it at the beginning, which makes sense whereas other teams might have built up to the test sessions, but they're not slow. And they were there also in the race simulations that were conducted during the tests. So, we're basically talking. We could talk about 11 teams being technically title contenders potentially. Maybe that's a bit of a stretch. Maybe 8, but that's how close it is. But what I really want to talk about, and I mentioned it earlier, Nico Müller, 3rd for Dragon. 1/10 basically off the time. I know you'll say don't read too much time into testing, but man, that was a performance.
He's a good driver, isn't he? I was surprised as well by the performance of Dragon, because especially we've heard stories about Dragon struggling with their season 6 powertrain development. From what I've heard, their powertrain reportedly is only a small development, a bit of an evolution from their season 5 powertrain, and theoretically, going by where they were in season 5, they should be very slow compared to the Techeetahs and to the Audis. We obviously don't know what testing programs the other teams did, but even if we don't go by the times and go by their distance, Dragon were the second best team in terms of how many laps they did. 457 in total. That's including 2 test races. We saw 2 test races in Valencia. Only BMW did lap the circuit more times. BMW at 511 laps, and as I say, Dragon at 457, which isn't much. And it's important for them, obviously, to collect as many laps as possible. And even if we go away from the times, because we shouldn't read too much into the times, it's impressive how many laps Dragon were doing in Valencia. It'll be interesting to see where they are going into Diriyah, because, as I said, the circuit and the layout and the track is just completely different to what we've seen in Valencia. But for now, though, Dragon looked very impressive and unexpectedly impressive.
And I remember talking to you about this, but with Müller, though, and we know he's been part of the Audi factory team in terms of DTM, and he's tested the Formula E car. And we know Daniel Abt, going back, and I'm already speculating on driver moves. We haven't even started season 6, but I'm already speculating for season 7. Daniel Abt, we all love him in the Formula E paddock. He's amazing, and he's a quick driver, and he's not done a bad job. I think he's got to match. He did have a season where he sort of was matching Degrassi, but it's not been consistent, and he knows that as well as anyone. But him coming out and saying that he hadn't had a drive confirmed, it was really late in the day that he carried on into season 6 with Audi, and you've got Nico Müller, who's effectively, from my understanding, maybe you might understand a bit more than me, but from my understanding, it's like effectively he's still part of Audi, but he's driving for Dragon, a bit like with Brendan Hartley and Porsche in the other seat at Dragon. Like, he tested the Porsche car, didn't get the Porsche drive ahead of Andre Lalaurie, but is still racing, and could eventually, if he did well, Brendan Hartley could find himself in that Porsche drive. But it could be the same with Müller with Audi, and I think going into the first couple of races of the season, if there's a driver to pinpoint who could be under pressure, it could be Daniel Abt.
I agree. Yeah, it's a bit different between the situation. I mean, the situation with Müller and Audi is different to the situation with Hartley and Porsche, because, as far as I'm concerned, maybe someone in the comments under the YouTube video, or I don't know, Twitter, wherever, maybe they might know a bit more. But as far as I'm concerned, Brandon still has a Porsche contract, but it will end at the end of December. As opposed to Nico's Audi contract. He will be racing with them in DTM next year again, and hence might have a shot at the Audi FE seat. And I agree, Daniel Abt now is under surveillance, and his performance will be closely monitored. He will need a decent season once again, just like he had in the second half of season 4. I think that would be enough for him. But if he doesn't, it's difficult to put into words. He will be monitored, and his performance will be monitored. And if he doesn't deliver like Alan McNish or anyone on the Audi side likes him to, he might, or his seat might be in danger. But that's all speculation, and I mean, we should let them drive season 6 first before speculating on season 7. But as you say, Nico Müller will be hoping to prove he deserves the Audi seat, and so will Daniel Abt. And yeah.
Is it too early to be slightly concerned though for Audi? 16th and 17th in testing overall. Like, at least I'm saying that because you're looking at them and they're both down there. At least with majority of the constructors, the other teams, you've got one driver sort of in the top 10 and another one, or one in the top 10, one a bit lower, one mid-teens, and but one 6th or 7th. Whereas both Audi, 16th and 17th, half a second off the pace. It's a close season as I drop my pen. Is it too early to be worried? Do Audi go into the first race of the season thinking, are we behind?
I think everyone's going into the first season asking where they are. I don't think we should be concerned about Audi. We don't know which testing program they were running, and they could just as well have finished inside the top 5, because it's just very, very close. I don't think they are worried about where they ended Valencia. We will only see the true performance of the Audi powertrain after qualifying in Diriyah, and we'll have to keep in mind that also Virgin runs Audi powertrains, and Virgin ended the Valencia test in 8th and 13th, I think. Yeah.
Yes.
So they were better than P16 and 17. We shouldn't read too much into where Audi ended Valencia, and we might read something into their qualifying performance after the Saturday race in Diriyah. But for now, I'm not worried at all about where Audi are. I think they'll again be one of the top, 5 teams. Yeah, let's not read too much into where Audi ended the Spain test.
I just think it's one to keep an eye on going into Saudi Arabia, because when you look at those timesheets and you're like, it's one to like, could Saudi Arabia confirm if Audi are actually off the pace, or was it just a testing run? That's what they did their plan, and they settled. It didn't, it shows straight away that it didn't matter, because they go to Saudi Arabia and they qualify P3 and P7 or P2 and P5, and then you're like, okay, Audi are here. They're not. When we shouldn't be scared about them. But it was just interesting. I was like, oh, that's a big team. 2 big teams down there. But again, though, I know we're talking about positions, and I agree with you in terms of that we shouldn't be worried or shouldn't be concerned. But I think for Porsche and Mercedes, they wouldn't like to have finished 19th, 20th, 21st, and 22nd. Not in that order. So Lotterer was 19th for Porsche. Mercedes field 20 and 21st. And Neil Yarni in the other Porsche in 22nd. A second off the pace for Neil Yarni, around 7 tenths in total for Mercedes, and Lotterer did a good time, was only 6 tenths behind. As I said, imagine that. It still amazes me that we're talking 19th, the rear of the field, and we're like 6-7 tenths off.
Yeah.
But I don't think. Would Porsche or Mercedes be happy with that? Would they be going, okay, look, we're not miles away?
I think that's what they're going to say, yeah. I don't think they've been expecting to be one of the top teams leaving Valencia. It's just a matter of learning how FE works, especially for Porsche. I feel Mercedes could have done a bit better because they've had a year of experience with HWA, but similar to Audi, they also have a customer team, which is Venturi, and the Venturi drivers finished in 18th and 12th, while the Works drivers finished in P20 and 21. So they were mediocre. They weren't great. Especially looking at their laps, 376 and 351 for both teams, around 200 laps less than BMW, for example. Only NIO were worse. They had a lot of technical issues in Valencia. So yeah, the test was mediocre for them, but I don't think they were expecting to be one of the top teams either. It's just a matter of giving them time, I think. And
I think so too. I think so too. Like in the press conference, both team principals were saying that we want to push and try and challenge for a podium at some point this season. I think they both know that if they were to get 8th, 9th, 10th, the bottom end of the points this season, I think they've done a good job. I think they'll be satisfied with that at the early stages. I think that's. It was expected. I was for sure, for one, not expecting Mercedes and Porsche to be topping the timesheets. I was expecting them to be about half a second off, maybe a bit more. They are maybe a touch more off the pace so far from what we've seen on a non-representative track, as we've said. But segueing into NIO, which you sort of mentioned there with the problems, the only team not in within a second, and Oliver Turvey, we know how strong he is, 1.4 seconds off the pace, and then Marching-Wa, nearly 2 seconds off the pace. I think you've got to be worried for NIO. I think, we haven't had a Formula E season where a team has failed to score points. Even I'm pretty sure NIO managed to pick up some points last season. I think it was 7 in total. Turvey picking them up, but. This could be a season where they don't finish in the points.
Oof, difficult to tell. I mean, we have to keep in mind there are 2 more cars on the grid, so from that perspective, yes, maybe. But there's also so much luck involved. It's not just car performance; it's also luck, and you don't score a point without just a slight bit of luck. Let it be in qualifying, crashes, safety cars. Something bringing you forward. You always need a bit of luck, and we shouldn't rule out NIO at this stage, I think. Still, they didn't look too happy leaving Valencia. The car looks nice, but apart from that, there are not too many positives. Sadly, I hope their standing will improve come Diriyah or at some point halfway through the season. Yeah, but for now, though, NIO, I'm a bit worried about them as well. But let's just wait how...
Yeah, it's a shame because Formula really hasn't had a true back market team. I suppose you can say you've had teams that are towards the rear possibly Venturi, Neo, and Dragon at last couple of
three,
seasons. But even like Venturi can crop up, and they won a race last season. But,
they did. And a second podium as well.
Yeah. So with Massa in Monaco, and but just touching very quickly on Venturi, they're probably exactly where we expect them to be in terms of 12th and 18th. Like, bang on. I think they were bang on the money. I think that's probably where they'd be. They'd probably be fine outside the points, trying to get into that lower end of the points. And I think they'll be in an intense battle with Mercedes and Porsche at the beginning of the season. And it'll be interesting to see. Like, they've become a customer team. They've been a manufactured status team for the first 5 seasons, and they've gone to a customer team. I think that makes sense. It's the exact same as why Virgin, obviously they had DS, but when they lost the DS status, they were like, we're not going to make our own powertrain, which is probably why we're worried about Dragon. And we've speculated that maybe they should go Dragon, that is, to have a manufacturer status behind them, because obviously it costs money themselves creating and developing a powertrain. Maybe buying one from a manufacturer who might be more interested in developing road cars might be more beneficial in the future for Dragon. But I think Venturi, I think they're bang on the money. It'd be interesting to see how they develop this season.
Yeah. Just because you briefly touched on the Dragon powertrain, we'll have to add that Neo is running the Season 5 Dragon powertrain. So yes, Dragon is running their Season 5 version 2.0 powertrain, kind of development for Season 6, but Neo is running the Season 5 Dragon motor and inverter, I think, but their own gearbox. So Neo technically still is a manufacturer in their own right, but they are using Dragon's Season 5 technology in terms of the motor and inverter. And Dragon weren't great, as I said earlier, last season. Add to that lots of political stuff behind the scenes going on at Neo. A lot of restructuring has been going on in these last few months with the new team ownership, a new team principal, just generally new personnel. There are a lot of Mahindra people now moving over to Neo because Mahindra has parted ways with Campos. Campos Racing, the are they a Formula 2 team or a Formula 3 team?
They were definitely Formula 2 for a while. Yeah. No, they are. The orange cars. So they're still Jack Aiken's car. That's Campos Racing. Okay,
good. Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of political stuff just generally going on behind the scenes at Neo. And with new owners, they'll have to, find a way to just get to grips again and focus themselves on the job ahead. And it's difficult to do that having the old technology from last year in the rear of their cars.
It's a shame. It's a shame for Neo because last season it felt like, okay, it's going to be a rebuild year for Season 6 and try and give back. But then with all the drama that's happened behind the scenes, it feels like they're going to have this season to now try and rebuild, ready for Season 7. It's horrible to write them off already. But nothing.
And we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't write them off just yet.
But nothing at the moment shows you that they're going to be a significant force this season.
Yeah. But I'm happy to be surprised by them, and I'm happy to see them competing for podiums. Why not?
I would be happy to. The more teams competing for podiums, the better. Like going into a race weekend and you don't even know who the back marker team who's going to be on the back row of the grid in qualifying would be immense.
Exactly, yeah.
But, it's just so far maybe not so good for Neo. Right, I think we've covered testing pretty comprehensively there, Tobias. I want to move on because there's a lot of... We talk about political issues and we're not a political podcast and we're not going to get into them. But Formula E cost Hong Kong. Hong Kong isn't on the calendar this season. Basically, because of the civil unrest, which I'm sure most people are aware of in the news. So we lost Hong Kong, but Marrakesh came in, which we were expecting Marrakesh on the December 15th type, but that's been cold, and it's sort of taken the Hong Kong spot. But that means we had the race in Saudi Arabia, but then in November 22nd and 23rd, but that left a massive gap then to Santiago in the middle of January. But now Chile, again, there's been some serious protests in Santiago. The protests have been pretty much about inequality, but again, I'm not going to go too much into it. But that's round 2 of the championship, and that's 3 months away now. Okay, and there's these protests that are going on. It'd be interesting. Formula E are starting to feel a bit more confident that the race will actually go ahead and everything will be okay by the time we get to Santiago. But if there is further protests, Formula E are in a really a bad situation where they might have to call off that race, have no time to put anything in there, unless Punta del Este is, Formula E's backup track, and if anything goes wrong, just chuck Punta del Este in there. Formula E could go from racing in November to then not having a race till February, and basically going for another off-season space between the first and second races.
Yeah, that'd be terrible. It's already 8 weeks between Diriyah and Chile, and it's difficult to put into words. Just like Hong Kong, Chile and Santiago especially just has better things to worry about than a sporting event right now. The civil disturbances are a priority for the country and for the government, and Formula E is not a thing they worry about right now. Having said that, the COP25 World Climate Summit, which was supposed to be hosted by Santiago in early December, has been called off, and that's in 2 months' time. And if we think another month ahead, that's when the FE race was supposed to happen. As of right now, the FE race is scheduled for the 18th of January. We'll have to wait and see. Chile has better things to worry about. And the local promoter and FE still are confident that the race will go ahead, and we'll have to underline that. They are still confident, and it's been communicated to the teams last week that FE still is confident that the Santiago E-Prix will go ahead. But if it doesn't, and if the protests turn out to be longer term, we'll have a 12-week gap between the season opening race weekend in Saudi and the next race in Mexico on 15th of February, which would be terrible for the teams and the marketing department and for us journalists looking for stories, because we have just this excitement building. I mean, we've been talking about it at the beginning of this episode. It's just 3 weeks until we're green in Diriyah, and then I was supposed to be waiting for 12 more weeks until we're back in Mexico. I'm hoping it all comes to a peaceful and friendly solution, and that things in Chile calm down. And as I say, they have more important things to worry about right now than FE. But if all goes well, we don't have to scrap the Santiago round. You briefly touched on Punta del Este maybe jumping in. I think it's a bit short notice this time round. We've seen the Sao Paulo E-Prix in Brazil being scrapped in December of 2017, and the race was supposed to be happening in March 2018, so they had about 3 months. And it's pretty much this week or the next one for the logistics department of FE. They must know about whether the race is going ahead or not in these next few weeks. And if they're going to be shipping their freight to either Chile or Uruguay, I feel it's a bit short notice to find a replacement, and that would create this awful 12-week gap between Saudi and Chile. Let's just hope for the best.
You're right. Formula E will know. There will be news about it within the next 2 weeks, because in terms of the shipping after Saudi Arabia, it needs to know where it's going.
Yep.
So, they're not going to wait around and not ship the stuff off, because then it won't get there in time. So they need to know where it's going. So, I reckon by the time we get to Saudi Arabia, or the week before the race in Saudi Arabia, we might know something will have to happen. Something will have to be said, because, people need to know where the freight's going. If it's not going to Santiago, then there's no point shipping it to Santiago to then ship it to Mexico without actually going to racing in Santiago. It's not climate friendly, and that's not what Formula E want. So therefore, I think a decision for that has to be made. But what I want to move on to is just talk about the calendar in general, because we it's obviously been a bit difficult, and obviously with WEC becoming a sort of a winter series as well, there's more opportunities for clashes, which, you know, for these two series can't. And as sad as it is, it did actually cost Sam Bird his drive at Ferrari at the AF Corsa. So, you know, it is affecting technically drivers' salaries. I know they're on a lot of money in some regard, but maybe not as much as like Formula One drivers and so forth. But, you know, there's still income. So, and Sam Bird had to give that up because of the clashes. There's so many clashes this season. So it is a problem. But what I was thinking was, should Formula E maybe scrap the idea of an 18, 19, 20, 21, starting in November, December, and then carrying on? Maybe should they just really, I think for Formula E, they should focus on the months where there isn't that much racing going on. Everyone is focused. And obviously with Formula One, you know, even talk about having 25 races in the future, which seems crazy. But even if they were to increase, obviously it's 22 races next season, so March to December. So I think between January and February, Formula E needs to get at least 3 races in to really drum up interest and drum up following for the championship. Because when you have one race a month, or you start in November, you don't race till January, as I said, even without Santiago possibly being called off, it's an 8-week period. I feel for a start of a season to have an 8-week gap between the first and second races is probably too long. I know that's why they wanted a race in December, but, you know, with the December slot disappearing, I still think that's too long of a gap.
It is, yeah. And thinking back to the 2015-16 season, which was the second year of FE, we had just that. The season began at the end of October. We had a race in November, December, then a 1-month gap, and continued with Buenos Aires in early February. We had Mexico in early to mid-March, and then the F1 calendar started up, and we had both seasons and both series running at the same time. Now it just seems we have a race before the F1 season ends. Saudi Arabia is the weekend before the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, and then there's this 8-month gap to Chile, which should be the first race weekend in all of 2020, unless the Daytona 24 Hours races before that. There's another race in Mexico in February, but then it's pretty much maybe Morocco as well, 29th of February. But apart from that, it's just pretty much the same part of the year that F1 also occupies. And in the early years of FE, that really was their big selling point. Not a unique selling point, but it was good that FE started late in the year and then attracted fans from F1 who just were frothing for something to watch. And now they pretty much just run parallel seasons. It could be a thing that FE wants to go back to. So either, they have to make a choice. Either go back to their Season 2 model and Season 1 model of starting, I don't know, in October, and then finishing their season in June, July, just like we are right now, or move the entire season into the new year and just have a 2020, or I don't know when in the future that might happen, 2023 season. I don't know.
I think from a marketing perspective, though, with having Porsche and Mercedes, like they have banged on about Porsche and Mercedes joining the series ever since the day they signed on that dotted line. And this is the season now. It's been 2 years in the making. And the season comes across, and you want people to be energized. You want people to be watching Formula E because you've got these gigantic manufacturers battling it out. So you want some form of consistent racing, I feel. And I feel like to get that, you needed to take advantage of these off-season months with other motorsports. And then really drum to sides. Yeah, I know it's Formula E. I know it's got all these controversies. It's electric, but hey, it's got Mercedes, it's got Porsche, it's got Audi, it's got Jaguar, it's got this. You know,
it's got good close racing.
and it's got close racing, and really just jump on that bandwagon and say, you know what, because obviously I'm talking not to the people who don't like Formula E, but for Formula E, they need to talk to those people and say, you know, I know you might not like electric cars because they don't make a sound or they're not as loud as modern petrol hybrid engines. So, but at the same time, look who we have. It's not like, and look at the drivers we've got. You know, it's not, Formula E has become a really good series in terms of the drivers calibrate. You know, getting to Nick de Vries, I think, is a massive steal for Mercedes, and I think that could be a way that F2, F3 drivers will be looking more seriously at Formula E as a career prospect now. I knew it would happen, but I think Nick de Vries might start that transition, and that's what I'm hoping for, because yes, we have a lot of X, but I suppose I'm answering my own question, and let me just segue into what my brain just thought of. Currently, Formula E, people say, oh, it's just full of ex-Formula 1 wash-up drivers who couldn't make it. Verne, Massa. Well, Massa wasn't wash-up, but, you know, it's just a retirement home. You know, Buemi, Hartley, you know. Whereas you could then say, Tobias, I don't know what you think, if you agree with this. If you start attracting the Nick de Vries of this world, maybe the Jack Aikins, the Mark Kolofs, then could Formula E then start being branded as the drivers that never made it or couldn't make it series?
It's that's the question of which is the supreme series, and I don't think does FE want to be bigger than F1?
I don't think it does, honestly. But you're going to hear it, right? We're Formula E fans, but there are tons of people who just, and we accept that. We understand that Formula E isn't the normal convention of racing. It's electric. Yes, it's the way forward, and yes, I feel like people need to start embracing electric cars a bit more, and I think people are. I think there is a start of a trend to that. But there are always going to be people, and I don't think Formula E ever will. You know, Formula 1, I think, are doing everything they can to remain the pinnacle motorsport and to make Formula 1 better. And, you know, obviously their rules came out a couple of days ago. I'm excited for 2021 for Formula 1 as a motorsport fan. I think, you know, I've got my fingers crossed that it does solve some of the solutions. But you're still going to have that select in 2021 of Formula 1 fans who will look at Formula E not as the enemy, but just as another series where, you know, where they say drivers are it's just the drivers that never made it series, or it's just a washed up F1 driver series. It'll still be there, but if we attract more young drivers, and maybe the young drivers who don't make it into Formula 1 for X reason, you know, start filtering into Formula E, which happened. Oliver Rowland, I think, could have easily made it into Formula 1, but, you know, money, and he's in Formula E. Nick de Vries, F2 champion, should probably be in Formula 1 next season, but he's in Formula E. So I don't think that counts as a driver that hasn't made it, if that makes sense. So, but maybe if more FE winners and F2 winners and runners up and third places start coming to Formula E, maybe you can't call it that. But if you're getting midfield Formula 2 drivers coming into Formula E that can't make it, then maybe you might. I'm creating my own conundrums here.
It's difficult to say, because it's especially difficult to compare these two series. It's still about driving in circles as fast as you can, both in FE and in F1. But there are different sort of requirements. In F1, you just have to be talented and quick enough, while in FE you also need brains. You still, of course, you have an advantage if you're a clever driver in F1, but the advantage of driving more consciously, if that makes sense, is bigger in FE. So I never understood people saying that FE is F1's graveyard. in a way, that's true because a lot of FE drivers are former F1 drivers. But the requirements for... But saying graveyard always implies Formula E is... what's the opposite of superior? Inferior, yeah, that's right. So that always implied Formula E is inferior to F1, which isn't the case, because you still need to be right up there, and you have to be mentally, I think, I don't know, more fit than in F1. So in a way, yes, a lot of Formula F1 drivers move to FE, but I think they very quickly found out, just ask Felipe Massa about it, that it's not just driving, but it's driving while doing mental arithmetics and everything. Yeah, I don't know if FE is ever going to be comparable to F1 in that sense. But certainly having drivers like Nick switch from F2 to FE helps the image of Formula E and helps Formula E moving away from the stereotype of it being the series for the drivers that just weren't quite good enough for F1, because we all know Nick de Vries would have been an amazing F1 driver, and he still might end up as a good F1 driver, but for now it'll help FE if drivers like Nick de Vries prioritize Formula E over another Formula 2 season.
Yeah, I don't even know how we got onto this subject. It's just what my brain just went into some sort of comparison. But I feel like it's always there, the comparison between Formula 1 and FE. And I think for whatever reason, when I was talking about the calendar and trying to shift it, it just popped up into my head about and drivers, jumping seats and so forth. I think it's an interesting debate and it's an interesting question. But I think Formula E will attract younger drivers because they will see that as a good career prospect now because of the amount of manufacturers that are in it. It's not a series that a young driver can go, oh, look, I can become a Works Mercedes driver, I can become a Works Jaguar driver, I can become a Works Audi driver, and that can lead to this opportunity, that opportunity, that opportunity, and I can have a range of a racing portfolio rather than just being at the top, which I know everyone wants to do in terms of just getting to Formula 1, which is every kid's dream and every young driver's dream that are in F2 and GP3. But when it comes to a point where they still want to build a career for themselves, and maybe F1's out the window. So, I think it's an interesting debate, and it'll be interesting to see if more young drivers do start coming across, and what people start saying about Formula E, because it'd be interesting. Maybe I'm, my predictions, my assumptions are wrong, and maybe people might think that's great, and there won't be that sort of it's just the kids that couldn't make it series. Maybe they think, it's a series that's challenging up all the budding young talent, which could be amazing, and it could be fantastic for Formula E, and maybe people won't see it like that. But I think we should move on. So there's not too much really to talk about left in terms of news, so we'll just wrap up last couple of bits. Future races. So as we were talking about the calendar, and then we sort of shifted off back to the calendar. Brazil, Japan. The new Formula E CEO, James, is Redgate. Talk about Brazil and Japan still being the focus for Formula E. And Tobias, how many times have we heard that over the past 3 years?
I don't know, 20? 30? Way too many times. But it's an open secret that FE really wants to go to Japan and Brazil. It's good that Jamie, however his last name is pronounced, I think it's Rigel, but I'm not too.
I can get it. I had it in my head. It's in my notes somewhere. I'll just go and retrieve it.
Okay, good.
It is.
Yeah, no, but it's
Rigel.
Good that Jamie R is a fan of the idea of racing in Japan as well.
You are right.
Yeah, and I mean, we've been very close to it. I remember a story in season 3 when the only thing that stopped FE from racing in Japan was the police being very restrictive in the way of them, blocking the streets and traffic disturbances and management and all of that. We had a show run in Japan, in Tokyo, a couple of years ago.
I think it was Tech Cheetah and Mark Preston went, and it was Yamamoto, I believe, who drove the car. Or it might have been the Aguri team. I don't know. I can't remember. I've definitely a Japanese driver that drove it, and I know Mark Preston went to that demo run in Tokyo.
Ooh, okay.
I just can't. I'm sure it was Tech Cheetah the first year, season 3. But it might have been the end of season 2, and it might have been the Aguri before he went. Yamamoto did drive the Aguri in season 2.
I only recall Lucas Di Grassi having a show run in Tokyo, in his Audi Up.
It might have been the same. It might have been the same test run, to be fair. And I just remember Mark Preston and because I do remember Lucas Di Grassi doing a street run as a demo run. That might have been in Tokyo.
Yeah. So anyway, Japan and Brazil have always been on the list of FE's.
Brazil's been on the FE's list since the inaugural calendar back in Rio de Janeiro.
Yeah.
So, it's 6-7 years now in the making for Brazil to try and get into it.
But Brazil also has political support this time around.
Yes.
There is the, I think, governor of Sao Paulo, who coincidentally is the cousin of the Brazilian president. And said cousin is working very closely with ex-Jaguar driver Nelson Piquet Jr. And the two of them are kind of organizing a race in Jarama? No, not Jarama. Somewhere near the Copacabana coast. And there is a circuit layout floating around in Brazilian media. It seemed...
In that park, I don't know if that's still the case.
Yeah, if he was supposed to be racing in season 4 in Sao Paulo, remember? On the same circuit that IndyCar once used. But it's now supposed to be a different layout. Oh, I don't know. But apparently FE is still wanting to race in both Japan and Brazil. And I feel these two countries are really still missing on the hit list of Formula E.
Yeah, I think
especially Japan.
If there was one, I'd rather have over the other. It's a bit harsh to say, but Japan sounds much. It's just, I don't know. There's something about Japan, and obviously with the Rugby World Cup that's going on there, and stuff like that.
Olympic Games 2024, I think, happening in Japan as well.
Yep, and you've got the Olympics there next year.
Was it next year?
Yep, 2020.
You're right. 2024 is Paris, right? I think.
Yeah, 24 is Paris. Yeah,
okay,
2020 good. Tokyo. But interesting here, like Yokohama has come up as a thing that has been possibly discussed for Formula E as well as Tokyo. So maybe if we can't do Tokyo, could we do it in Yokohama? So that sounds interesting because obviously Tokyo is such a big city. Maybe like London, it's just really hard to find a place in Tokyo to do a race. So maybe Yokohama, there might be more opportunities there. Still a big city, but maybe not as big as Tokyo. So something may be there, and it's not too far from Tokyo, which is not too bad either. So
Yokohama would be nice for Nissan as well.
Yeah, and obviously, Nissan home team. So yeah, we'll see. I think there's still obviously Jakarta didn't really come out of nowhere, but sort of did to be on the season 6 calendar. Obviously, there was a lot of talk about Jakarta over the last year or so, but and Seoul has always also been, again, didn't come out of nowhere, but Formula E have really focused on the Asian continent in terms of trying to get into major Asian cities, and obviously Shanghai is still in China that they're still trying to work on as well. So it'll be interesting to see what cities they come on. But as I said, we keep talking about this, and I suppose the only thing to add to this conversation is how many races is enough. Like, we're talking Formula 1 crazy in terms of, the maximum limit can be 25. Like, there's so many huge cities in this world, and there's so many huge markets that Formula E could go to. Obviously China, Japan, huge markets. Russia, huge market. America, Europe. there's so many amazing cities that Formula E could go to. Like, how many, should Formula E maybe be eyeing up like 17, 18 races a season? Should that become a goal? Like, rather than this 14, 13, 15 odd races that we've got right now? Should Formula E maybe start thinking, okay, we need to move forward? But does that affect the cost? As I said, there's a massive argument to have with it, because you move forward, but then it's the costs of actually having those extra races.
I think it's a thing that will just happen naturally. We have 14 races on the calendar, but in 12 cities, because obviously we have a double header in Saudi and in London. So 14 races in 12 cities. And I think we can easily extend that to, 16 cities. But as you say, the cost factor is important to keep in mind, and the family factor as well. Because that's the argument in F1, isn't it? The families of mechanics and drivers and team officials, just that their family life, and the journalists' families' lives suffering because they're just always on the road. I think 12 races is okay. I feel like there could be a few more, but I might be biased because I like watching FE races. But anyway, I think it'll happen naturally that we will see a few more destinations on the Formula E calendar in these next few years. But as long as we don't enter F1 spheres with 22 destinations or 25 destinations as made possible by the new 2021 regulations, that's okay. It'll happen naturally. I think we might end up with 16, maybe 20 races in 16 destinations. How about that? Sounds okay to me.
Yeah, that's. I was gonna say something to you actually, which my brain was thinking. I love how sometimes my brain just works in these podcasts. It just comes up with random ideas. But I'm not saying in the next year or two, but maybe in the future, maybe 10 seasons in. Do you think Formula E might have grown enough that we might have, like, say 15, let's say 15 or 16 cities, but we have 32 races because they're all double headers, they're Saturdays and Sundays? Do you think that could be something that would be quite cool, or would be Formula E might think, because obviously we have some races are 2 days events, and it depends on where Formula E go. Like, for example, Berlin, I think Berlin could be a double. There's no reason why Berlin, for example, isn't a double header each race. And London, it makes sense. Santiago in the park, it was wide enough, it could have worked. I think there's some distance. Obviously, Saudi Arabia really wanted a double header, and if a city wants to do a double header, then I think we shouldn't stop doing the double header, if that makes sense. Maybe not all of them. But do you see maybe in the future that Formula E do more double headers in cities?
A few more, but not massively more double headers. I think having 2 races on a weekend takes away a bit of excitement. And when you're watching the Saturday race, you're always thinking of, well, this result isn't the final result of the weekend because there's another race happening tomorrow. And I think that maybe takes away a bit of excitement. I think the season finale should be a double header because that coincidentally brings a lot of excitement, having 2 races in London. And the championship
open.
Yeah, that's right. It keeps the championship open. But having a double header in Sanya, I don't see the point in having that. Because it just takes away the excitement, plus you can leave earlier from there.
I get that point. I understand that. Because, it's just, as I said, I love how my brain works sometimes. It's just random thoughts just pop up into my head. But at the same time, I think you're right. I think a double header to kickstart the season's fun at Saudi Arabia because you really want the season to kick off. You don't just have the one race and it's just a race order. Like, there can be a little bit of a mix up in the championship. It brings drivers a bit closer, so you get a bit to work out a bit more how the season might go. Maybe a doubleheader in the middle somewhere, maybe one. I think, as I said, Berlin looks like a really ideal place for it, simply because it's in an airfield. And maybe just the one then to end the season, to keep the championship open, to drum up that excitement. I think maybe that's a bit more reasonable than having obviously one every race. I just thought for a second, imagine if we had a double header at every race. But then, as you said, yeah, you're right. The excitement, you have to wait till Sunday to see how everything. The Saturday race is not irrelevant, but you're not leaving the Saturday race thinking, how does that affect the championship? Because it can all change tomorrow.
Yeah.
On the following day.
And I think it also affects the atmosphere in the crowd. And just like us journalists leaving the track on Saturday thinking, well, we'll be back tomorrow, and tomorrow we will know how all things end. The same will apply to the fans. And that's always been one of Formula E's key selling points. The one-day event, everything happening in one day. And that will still be true with a double-header, but there'll be more on the second day still. Difficult to put into words, but I think you know where I'm aiming at.
Yeah, I know what you're trying to. Where you're trying to get.
It takes away some of the excitement of having this one-day format where everything has to come together. I think it's better to keep double headers a rare thing in FE.
Yeah. Now that I've given it some thought and my brain's actually processed it, I'm like, I agree with you. So, yeah, I think that's a perfect way to end the podcast, actually. I think we've come to a pretty natural close there. So, thank you so much, Tobias, for coming on again.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Lovely as always.
Lovely as always.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for the continuous support. I've been really amazed by the support on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and the support that we're getting on there. Obviously on YouTube and on Twitter, and how everyone is really liking the podcast. If as I said, we're always open. If any improvements, if anything you'd like us to do or want us to see, just comment, tell us. We really think this would be amazing, and we would look at that and definitely try and see if we can fit that in some way. Remember to subscribe, smash that like button, always get those plugs in. If you're on YouTube, or to be fair, or even on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts, hit that subscribe button. It really helps. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you after Saudi Arabia for the next podcast, probably. So we will see you after the first round of the season.
Bye-bye.